Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling the Arcturus Therapeutics first quarter 2025 earnings call.
Yep. We're here to break down the numbers, the pipeline news, and really pull out what matters for you, the experienced investor.
Exactly. Cut through the noise, find the key insights, maybe even a few surprises.
Right. We've sifted through it, all the financials, the commentary, to give you the distilled view on where Arcturus stands and what's coming next. It's about those strategic moves and catalysts.
Okay, let's dive in. First, the quick snapshot. Q1 2025 versus Q1 last year. Revenues first.
Revenues are down a bit. Came in at $29.4 million compared to $38 million in Q1 2024.
Okay, but on the other side of the coin, the net loss.
That actually improved quite a bit, actually. Net loss was $14.1 million. That's 0.52 pence per share. A year ago, it was $27.1 million, or $1 per share. So yeah, a significant improvement there.
Fewer revenues, but a smaller loss. Interesting. How about cash?
Cash and equivalents, well, they decreased from the end of last year. Ended Q1 at $273.8 million. That's down about $20 million sequentially.
Right, a bit of burn there.
But, and this is the really big news, I think, despite that decrease, they announced a major extension to their cash runway.
Oh, how major.
They're now projecting funding into the first quarter of 2028.
Wow, okay. 2028, that's a long way out. How did they pull that off?
It boils down to a strategic shift. They talked about focusing resources, really narrowing their R&D efforts, plus some significant cost reductions.
Makes sense. You can't just find that kind of runway under the sofa cushions. So digging in a bit more then, the revenue dip, but what was behind that?
Mostly it was about lower development milestone money from their CSL collaboration.
Ah, the Co-stive vaccine partner.
Exactly. As Co-stive moves from development towards, potential commercialization, CSL takes over more and the type of revenue changes. Less upfront development cash.
Okay. And the improved loss must mean expenses dropped quite a bit.
Absolutely. R&D spend was way down, $34.9 million this quarter versus $53.6 million a year ago.
What drove that R&D drop mainly?
A big part was lower manufacturing costs for those partnered programs, Co-stive, Lunar FLU, the Part A stuff. They did have some increased costs for their own programs, Lunar CF and Lunar OTC, as they push those forward.
So those wholly owned programs are getting more investment now.
Right, but the overall trend is down. They actually said R&D spend dropped from Q4 last year, and they expect it to keep falling quarter over quarter in the second half of this year.
And G&A costs, general and admin.
Also down, $11.3 million from $14.9 million. Mainly less share-based comp and lower costs as they hand off the Co-stive commercial work to CSL. They expect G&A to decrease more over the next year or two.
So that strategic focus is really hitting the bottom line, concentrating the spending.
Precisely. Focusing R&D almost entirely now on CF and OTC. That's the engine driving these cost cuts and that runway extension to 2028. They mentioned making tough calls, like cutting some early programs, consolidating facilities.
Makes sense. Any incoming cash mentioned?
Yeah, they did get an initial milestone payment from CSL for the EU approval of Co-stive. And they're expecting another one in Q2, so this quarter.
Okay, good context. Let's pivot to the pipeline then. This is where the excitement often is. ARCT 32 for cystic fibrosis, that feels like a big one.
It really is.
Yeah.
Potentially huge. They're enrolling this phase 2 study, open label, multiple ascending doses, and the key is who they're enrolling.
Right, tell us about that.
It's adults with CFT who either can't take the current CFTR modulators, don't respond well, are intolerant, or just don't have access. Basically, the group with the highest unmet need right now.
Modulators being those pills that help a lot of CF patients, but not all of them.
Exactly. So this trial involves daily inhaled treatments for 28 days straight.
Daily inhaled for a month. How's that going? Any issues?
They started dosing back in December 2024. It's ongoing, multiple subjects enrolled, and importantly, they said no safety or tolerability issues reported so far. That's critical for a daily inhaled therapy.
Definitely. When do they expect to finish enrolling this phase 2?
Plan is by the end of 2025.
Okay, but the thing everyone's watching for is the interim data. When's that?
Mid-2025, so coming up pretty soon. This first look will be from the first 2 dose groups.
How many patients would that be, roughly?
The whole study is planned for 12 subjects. So the interim data should cover somewhere between, say, 6 and 9 people.
Okay, 6 to 9 patients. What are we looking for? What's the bar for success here?
2 key things. First, like I said, just showing it's safe and tolerable when inhaled daily for 28 days. That's a big hurdle itself.
Right.
If they clear that, then it's about efficacy, lung function, measured by FEV, forced expiratory volume.
The standard measure.
Yep. And management said a 3% improvement in FEV compared to baseline is what they see as enough to justify moving to phase 3.
Just 3%. Sounds kind of low, maybe.
Well, you have to remember the context. This is a group with few or no other options, so any real improvement is meaningful.
Good point.
And they also added, if they see 5% or more improvement, that could potentially make the phase 3 trial significantly smaller, maybe under 100 patients needed for the efficacy part.
Wow, okay. That would be a game changer for cost and timeline.
Definitely. Though they did mention you'd still likely need a safety database around 100 total patients treated for a decent amount of time for regulators.
Got it. And the patients in the trial, what kind of CF mutations do they have?
They're all non-modulator responders. Roughly half have class 1 mutations, which are typically very severe, basically no protein function. The other half have other non-class 1 mutations, but still don't benefit from modulators. Management views them all as having a similar high unmet need.
Now, you hear about challenges with inhaled mRNA therapy sometimes, especially tolerability. Arcturus seems to think they have an edge.
They really emphasize this. 2 main points of differentiation they highlighted. First, the delivery tech, the lunar lipid nanoparticle, the LNP. They stressed it's chemically different from competitor LNPs.
The fatty bubble carrying the mRNA?
Right. And second, their IP around mRNA purification. They claim their process removes impurities really well, which they think could widen the therapeutic window. The gap between an effective dose and a problematic dose, and maybe improve safety and tolerability compared to others.
Interesting. How often are they checking FEV in the study? Once at the end?
No, multiple times. About 7 times over the 28 days and during follow-up. They expect the interim data mid-year to include the FEV results covering the full 28-day treatment period. Maybe not all the longer follow-up points yet, though.
And is there hope this could actually, repair the lung over time? Remodeling?
That's the hope, yes. They acknowledge some damage might be permanent, but the lung can heal. The theory is if you fix the underlying problem locally, you might see steady improvement over time. How much and for how long? Still big questions.
Are they measuring anything else, like how patients feel?
Yep, they're using a standard CF questionnaire for quality of life and symptoms. While FEV is usually the key thing for the FDA for phase 3, those patient-reported outcomes add important context.
Okay, let's switch to the other lead program. ARCT 810 for OTC deficiency.
Right, ornithine transcarbamylase deficiency. A rare genetic disorder causes ammonia buildup because the body can't process nitrogen waste properly.
Nasty stuff. How's that trial going?
They're still enrolling their phase 2 study. It's
Yes.
open label, involves 5 IV infusions over about 2 months. They just finished dosing a group of 8 people at the 0.3 millikilogram dose.
And the data readout for this one?
Very soon. Expected this quarter, Q2 2025.
Okay. What are they measuring to see if it's working? What are the biomarkers?
The main ones are glutamine and ammonia levels. Glutamine is interesting because when the main urea cycle is broken, glutamine acts like a temporary storage for that excess ammonia. So high glutamine is a sign of the problem.
Ah, okay.
They're also using a newer test, a 15N urogenesis assay. It uses a safe tracer to measure how well the body is actually making urea, directly testing the cycle's function.
So what would count as success?
Yeah.
Especially for glutamine.
Getting glutamine levels back down into the normal range consistently. That would be pretty convincing evidence that the therapy is restoring function. They're tracking other things too, like uric acid in urine, but glutamine seems key clinically.
Are they taking liver biopsies to check delivery?
No liver biopsies in this study. They're relying on those functional biomarkers, glutamine ammonia, the 15N assay, to show the mRNA is getting to the liver and fixing the enzyme problem. Regulators are often okay with that for serious rare diseases if the biomarker data is strong.
Makes sense. Okay, quick updates on the vaccines then. Co-stive, the COVID vaccine with CSL.
Positive news there. They highlighted the recent EU approval. Got a milestone payment for that already. They're working with CSL on more filings, UK MAA this quarter, US BLA planned for Q3.
And updating it for new strains?
Yep, they're working on updating the vaccine for the new WHO recommended strain, aiming for distribution in Japan.
Any interesting data publications?
2 they mentioned. One was long-term safety data from a big study in Vietnam, over 17,000 people. Notably, they reported 0 cases of myocarditis or pericarditis.
That's significant.
Yeah. And second, some preclinical data suggesting the spike protein from their vaccine hangs around in lymph nodes for up to 28 days. They think this longer presence in immune centers might explain why they see strong immunogenicity.
Any milestones tied specifically to the U.S. filing or approval?
There's a sales milestone tied to first U.S. revenue, but they don't expect that until 2028, and it's not baked into their current cash runway calculation.
Yeah.
Nothing just for getting the BLA approved.
Gotcha. And the bird flu vaccine, ARCT 2304.
That one's moving along with BARDA funding. Got FDA Fast Track designation back in April. They finished enrolling the phase 1 trial, 212 adults, including 80 people over 60.
And data from that?
Interim phase 1 data expected in the second half of this year.
Okay, so pulling back to the big picture, this sharp focus now on CF and OTC, plus the longer runway, what's the key message for investors here?
It really signals clear priorities. Management positioned it as a strategic necessity, given the market, maybe some regulatory uncertainty out there. They're betting on maximizing value from these two advanced therapeutic programs.
And that's why R&D spending is set to drop further.
Exactly. And it's what bought them that runway to 2028.
Which crucially gets them through these upcoming data readouts without needing more cash right away.
Precisely. That mid-2025 CF data, the Q2 OTC data, these are the big potential value drivers now. The runway de-risks getting to those points, especially for CF, hitting that unmet need population. If the data is good, it could be huge validation.
And hitting those FEV numbers, particularly that 5% mark in CF, could really alter the phase 3 path, couldn't it?
Absolutely. Like we discussed, 3% might mean a bigger, longer phase 3. But 5% or more could potentially mean a much smaller, faster, cheaper efficacy trial. Still need the safety numbers, but it changes the whole risk-reward calculation for the program.
And for OTC, if they normalize glutamine, what does that signal?
For a rare disease, showing you can fix a key functional biomarker like glutamine, that's powerful. It strongly suggests the whole system is working, delivery to the liver, enzyme production, fixing the metabolic problem. That would be a very positive sign.
So it sounds like a period of really focused execution ahead. Key data points coming up, backed by a solid financial position.
That's the narrative. They've made focused choices, managed the burn, improved the loss profile, all to get to these clinical results in CF and OTC over the next few quarters. They also threw in a comment that regulatory interactions are proceeding normally, science-based, despite any headlines you might see elsewhere.
Right. Okay, let's completely switch gears now. And let me put up the giant flashing sign. This is not financial advice, purely illustrative, okay? Think of this like a hypothetical pitch session at a speculative fund.
All right, hypothetically speaking, I'm listening.
Okay, idea one. The aggressive CF binary bet premise. That mid-2025 CF data with just 6 th9 patients is everything. The pitch. If they nail that 5% plus FEV improvement and show squeaky clean tolerability for 28 days daily inhaled, well, that could massively de-risk phase 3 and re-rate the stock overnight. The outrageous bit. Buying way out of the money call options timed to expire just after that data drop window. Pure catalyst gambling arguing the potential pop justifies the likely loss.
High-octane speculation, playing the event. Got it. What else is in the hypothetical playbook?
How about a relative value on CF differentiation play? Remember how they specifically mentioned competitor tolerability issues and highlighted their LNP and purity as potential safety advantages?
Yeah, they make a point of that.
The pitch. Find a specific competitor known to have had some bumps with their inhaled CF mRNA tolerability. Then set up a pairs trade. Long Arcturus, short that specific competitor. Thesis. If Arcturus' interim data comes out clean on safety, it validates their differentiation story against that specific competitor. Arcturus could get re-rated up, competitor might slip, you profit from the spread widening. Plausible because differentiation is key. Outrageous because you're picking a specific horse race based on management claims and super early data from maybe 9 people.
Both definitely lean into the speculative nature of biotech investing around key data points and platform narratives.
Exactly. And again, folks, just illustrative ideas, not recommendations.
So let's wrap up this deep dive on Arcturus. Key takeaways. Cash runway pushed way out to Q1 2028. That's enabled it by really focusing R&D on CF and OTC, plus cutting costs.
Which sets them up for those crucial near-term data points, mid-2025 for CF, and literally this quarter, Q2 for OTC.
Right. And meanwhile, the vaccine programs keep moving Co-stive with CSL filings coming up, bird flu data in the second half.
And they did improve that net loss while managing cash.
Correct. So the story is concentration of resources, aiming for major clinical wins in CF and OTC, all now backed by a much longer financial runway.
And remember, as always, this is just for informational purposes, definitely not financial advice. Always do your own research.
We've laid out what the company presented, thinking about their strategy, this upcoming data, the runway. What part of this story resonates most with you as you think about what's next for them?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive summary. We hope it was useful and encourage you to keep digging and form your own views.